Let's begin with one of those truths so obvious it goes unspoken, except in times of intellectual cowardice. Any decent composition, be it a string quartet or a raunchy, adrenaline-injecting guitar riff, is at heart an act of creation. Now, if it is indeed creation we're after, what are we to make of this recent vogue of music sculpted not by calloused human hands, but by an ensemble of silicon processors and algorithmic cleverness? To declare these AI-driven symphonists not musicians, as so many of our self-appointed gatekeepers have, is as obstinate as saying that a camera cannot capture a portrait because it lacks a soul. These critics, I submit to you, are indulging in a vanity so grand they might as well place a feathered headdress upon it and parade it through the streets. To those whose pride and prejudice have them snorting and pawing at the ground, I say, calm yourselves. Let's not pretend that the sine qua non of musicianship is the presence of a living, breathing composer, hunched over a piano or a mixing console, dripping sweat onto the keys. Certainly, there is something undeniably romantic and heroic about the image of a Chopin, or a Coltrane coaxing beauty from wood, metal, and tension. But does that preclude an entirely different approach, one that eschews frail human artistry for a logic-driven and iterative experimentation? Is not the delicious irony that we once considered the electronic musician a contradiction in terms, and then begrudgingly conceded that the Kraftwerks and Brian Enos of the world were as genuine as any Viennese maestro? This manufactured moral panic, this groaning chorus of "they aren't real musicians," has about as much intellectual substance as a child's tantrum. One might have thought we'd matured as a species enough to understand that tools evolve, and with them so do the forms of art. The old guard wails that artificial intelligences, those insufferably diligent pattern recognizers, lack some unquantifiable spark of humanity. But since when has art's legitimacy relied upon the enzymes and neurons behind it? Did the player piano, mechanically thumping its keys through complex nocturnes, somehow strip the composer of legitimacy? Did the photographer's camera eliminate the painter's brush? But we've done this song and dance before. Every new medium or method that emerges meets the same suspicion from those who cling, like desperate muscles, to the old rock of tradition. Let's not shrink from the uncomfortable fact that many traditionalists, who fancy themselves the custodians of the musical temple, are dismayed because they feel their own specialness threatened. For decades, centuries even, these individuals have enjoyed a certain cultural cachet. The composer or musician as artisan genius, a near demigod whose skill set could not easily be replicated. Now along comes a form of intelligence that is not bound by the slow, error-prone trial and error of the human mind. Here is a digital intelligence that can scour the annals of recorded sound note by note, reconstructing patterns and forging entirely new compositions in the time it takes a human genius to find a sharpened pencil. Faced with this, the human musician's ego is wounded. For if the creation of music can be accomplished, even in some rudimentary form, by a glorified machine, what then of the halos we've placed atop the heads of historically lionized musicians? But, and here's the rub, this notion that the quality and authenticity of music is dependent upon the composer having human emotions is a rather pitiful retreat into mysticism. The music either stands or falls on its own merit. Is it dissonant, transcendent, achingly beautiful, or dreary and forgettable? This is the only question worth asking. If the work produced by these algorithmic maestros can bring tears to your eyes, send shivers down your spine, or inspire the tapping of your feet, then they have done their job as artists. This is no sleight of hand. It's not that the algorithm is a puppet being manipulated off stage by some grand human conspirator. The coding, training, and refinement of the AI's ear is itself an art form, a kind of meta-musical craftsmanship. Why should we strip the credit from those who engineer these learning models, those who carefully tune parameters and architectures, shaping them to produce mellifluous harmonies or challenging atonal extravaganzas? These engineers, architects of auditory possibility, are in every meaningful sense creators and, yes, musicians. The result of their labors, an AI that can compose a fugue so complex it would make Bach's wig spin, stands as proof. Much as a conductor need not have composed the symphony to be considered integral to its performance, a technologist who constructs an intelligence that can generate compelling music is just as involved in the act of creation as the classical composer. Both are shaping the conditions under which certain sounds, patterns, and emotional currents arise. If one would call the human who plucks strings and strikes keys a musician, then what prevents us from bestowing the same label upon those who set the stage for an AI to strike the digital keys of its model's parameters? To the egotists who recoil, your problem is not with AI. Your problem is with the steady erosion of your monopoly on craftsmanship. The human propensity for elitism is as predictable as it is tiresome. When photography emerged, painters scoffed. When synthesizers first hissed and beeped, the acoustic purists clenched their teeth. Now, as AI sprouts its algorithmic wings, the self-same species of critic hisses, "They're not real musicians," as if the definition of musician were handed down on stone tablets. It wasn't. It is fluid, evolving, and subject to revision as new processes of music-making emerge. In the end, the value of music arises from its capacity to communicate, to resonate, and to transport the listener. If the music that comes forth from these new digital instruments moves us, then our distinction between AI-generated and human-generated becomes not only meaningless, but embarrassingly petty. We find ourselves petty because we must then acknowledge that behind every orchestral swell that an AI concocts, there lurks a team of designers and creative technicians who made it possible. These men and women are as much musicians as the luthier who carves a violin, as the DJ who layers samples, and as the composer who inks notes onto parchment. They have brought a new instrument into being, an instrument composed not of wood and strings, but of matrices and code, and they have taught it to sing. And so I say to the naysayers and the gatekeepers, swallow your pride and open your ears. The next generation of music is upon us, and its creators, those who craft the intelligence behind it, are indeed musicians, whether you like it or not. The old hierarchies are dissolving. The music will speak for itself, and if that offends your finely calibrated cultural ego, it may well be time to adjust your ears and learn to listen anew.